Sunday morning Bible class. It is good to have everybody here this morning. Today we are moving on. We're going to be in chapters 7 and 8 of 1 Corinthians. As you know, Dale kicked us off into the book as we were working our way through it. And so at the beginning of Corinthians, and because this is Paul writing a letter to the congregation, the church there in Corinth, that he helped start. And he was there for 2 years, and so obviously there's a lot of connections there, whatever else, and close relationships. And then he had gone on what we call the third missionary journey, and he's over at Ephesus now. So he's been gone from there a little bit, and he gets all these reports about stuff going on, and obviously feeling some responsibility for that church there, that congregation. He's writing to them and talking to them because right off the bat they've got a bunch of division going on, and there's nothing worse than division in the church. Here's an interesting statistic, and I say statistic, it's my observation that someone else identified it before, and then I've kind of looked at it myself, is that when you have division or conflict within a congregation, something significant, how long does it take the congregation to get over that and start moving forward again? Anybody want to guess?
Sometimes they never do.
Exactly. Sometimes they never do. But if they do, 10 years. So imagine you're going along, you're strong, you're doing something, and then there's a perturbation. There's a problem. And then there's internal dispute. I know when I was growing up, the church, they were building a new education wing. And they split in the process because some people wanted one water fountain at the middle level, and other people wanted a water fountain at the top and the bottom. And let me ask you a question. Was it about the water fountain? No. It wasn't about the water fountain. But people found something to rally about, and off they go. Yeah. Well, in this case, Paul is fussing at them because the folks there, some had said, well, Paul was the first one here, so I'm a Paul follower. And then apparently Apollos and Cephas came in, and some people they like the way Apollos taught, And so they're creating a division over the teacher, who they follow, and who's it really all about? Jesus. Paul was teaching division about Jesus. Apollos was teaching. Cephas was teaching about Jesus. Everybody's teaching about Jesus, but there's all these issues that are going on, and that's what Paul talks about, and he's writing a letter to. And then there's disorder within the congregation as well. You've got in this example, Paul says, you guys are. You got folks in your congregation that are doing things that even the pagans think is bad. How in the world do you justify that in your mind? You got lawsuits against each other, things that are going on. You got people saying, well, I'm a Christian, and so all my sins are taken away, so I can do whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it. Right? And they're missing the picture, right? And Paul's saying, listen, people, basically, you have no rights. Your Christ has redeemed you, and you really need to get yourself under control. And you need to deal with these inner things. And then they had written him a letter and asked him some questions. Now, we didn't get Paul's letters, the questions that Paul got asked. We just get the responses. And so, as we go through here and we read this, he's answering questions. And so you can pretty much surmise what is going on there, but there's obviously nuances within that culture, and then specific situations that while we say, well, that doesn't really apply to us today because we're talking about married, well, here's something we talk about, married couples' obligations to each other, unmarried, whether or not you should stay unmarried or not. We've got, if you're married to an unbeliever, should you leave that unbeliever? And then this whole need to consider your weaker brother. So that's kind of the things that we're going to talk about here, and we'll work through some of those after I read it. But I'm going to read chapter 7 and 8, and then we're going to make some applications. So, now for the matters that you wrote me about, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. But since sexual immorality is occurring, and we talked about Corinth, that was their whole, that was all part of their worship. I mean, Corinth was known for all of the sexual activity associated with everything. It says, but since sexual immorality is occurring, each man should have sexual relations with his own wife, and each woman with her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duties to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. And in the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Do not deprive each other except for perhaps by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. When it comes together again, so that Satan will not tempt you. Then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you, and because of your lack of self-control. I say this as a concession, not as a command. I wish that all of you were as I am, but each of you has his own gift from God. One has this gift, and the other has that. Now to the unmarried and to the widows I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried, as I do. But if you cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. To the married I give this command, not I, but the Lord. The wife must not separate from the husband. But if she does, she must remain unmarried, or else be reconciled to her husband. And the husband must not divorce his wife. To the rest I say, I, once again, not the Lord, if a brother has a wife who is not a believer and she is willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. And if the woman has a husband who is not a believer, he is willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband has been sanctified through the wife, and the unbelieving wife has been sanctified through her believing husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbeliever leaves, let it be so. The brother or sister is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace. How do you know your wife, whether you will save your husband, or how do you know, husband, whether you'll save your wife? Nevertheless, each person should live as a believer in whatever situation the Lord has assigned them, just as God has called them. This is the rule I lay down to all the churches. When a man was a man already circumcised when he was called? He should not become uncircumcised. Was a man circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. Keeping God's command is what counts. Each person should remain in the situation they were in when God called them. Were you a slave when you were called? Don't let it trouble you, although if you gain your freedom, do so. For the one who was a slave and then called to faith in the Lord is the Lord's freed person. Similarly, the one who is free when called is Christ's slave. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves to human beings. Brothers and sisters, each person is responsible to God and should remain in the situation that when God called him. Now about virgins. I have no command from the Lord, but I give judgment as to who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. Because of the present crisis, I think that it is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you pledged to a woman? Do not seek release. Are you free from such commitment? Do not look for a wife, but if you marry, you have not sinned, and if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. But those who marry will face many troubles in this life, and I want to spare you this. What I mean is, brothers and sisters, the time is short. From now to those who have wives should live as if they do not, and those who mourn as if they did not, and those who are happy as if they were not, but those who buy something as if it was not theirs to keep. Those who use the things of this world as if not engrossed by them, for this world is in its present form is passing away. I would like for you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs. How can he? An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs. How can he please the Lord? But a married man is concerned about the affairs of the world. How can he please his wife? And his interests are divided. The unmarried woman or a virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world. How can she please her husband? I'm saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way in undivided devotion to the Lord. That's what it's all about. There's a lot of stuff going on there, but what is he saying? We need to have our attention on who? On the Lord. That's what it's about. If anyone is worried about what that he might not act honorably towards the virgin he is engaged to, or if his passions are strong, he feels that he ought to marry, he should do as he wants. He is not sinning. They should get married, but for the man who has settled the matter in his own mind and is under no compulsion but has control over his own will, who has made up his mind not to marry the virgin, this man also does right. So then, he who marries a virgin does right, but he who does not marry her does better. A woman is bound to her husband as long as she lives, but if a husband dies, she is free to remarry anyone she wishes, but he must belong to the Lord. In my judgment, she is happier if she stays as she is, and I think that I too have the Spirit of God. Now we jump over to chapter 8. Now about food sacrificed to idols. We know that we are all possess knowledge, but knowledge puffs up when love builds up. Those who think they know something do not know as they ought to know, but whoever loves God is known by God. So then, by eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in this world, and that there is no God but one. But even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things come, and from whom we live. There is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. But not everyone possesses this knowledge. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to God. Since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. Be careful, however, to exercise your rights, that exercising your rights does not become a stumbling block for the weak. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you and all your knowledge eating in the idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to the idols? So this weak brother or sister from whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. And when you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall in sin, I will never eat again, so that I may not cause them to fall. Wow! Is that too action-packed? Lot of stuff to digest chapters? That's a lot of stuff. So what do you do with that? Well, number one is, I expect you to go home and read it again every day this week. And you can work through it. But we're going to work through it. And And I'm going to do my best to summarize the key points that he's talking in there. And I've worked on this all week trying to bring this down. And what are we really supposed to draw out? And this is what I drew out. Number one, sexual relations belong within marriage, and it's not to be weaponized. Right? It's not to be weaponized. Sexual relations, God created them, and it's a great thing, but it belongs within marriage. Outside of marriage, it causes, and you all have seen it your entire life, it causes dysfunction and bad problems, right? That's because that's not where it belongs. That's not how God created it. But number two is, it says, the man's body doesn't belong to him, and the wife's body doesn't belong to her. And if we're not going to be doing these things, it needs to be, one, for a purpose, right? Mutually agreed on a purpose. And number two is that it's for a limited duration, because the devil is going to use it and cause problems. The next thing that comes out of this, if it's possible, stay single and focused on serving God. That's what he's talking about. If you can stay single like I am, you have the ability to stay focused on God. But if you're married, what happens? Well, I'm very concerned about my wife and my children and all these things, and I get distracted pretty easy. I mean, there's squirrels in my life like nobody's business. But here's what's important is, single or married, where does that focus supposed to be? On God. Right? But we get so distracted, especially in this world, we've got squirrels everywhere. Right? And whether we're single or married, we're looking at earthly things, and we got all this stuff going on, and we're not focused where we need to be. Not focused. Jamie and I went overseas for a couple of years into Albania and did mission work. And, before we went, we were living life like everybody else, I mean, things were going on, and we went over there, and every morning I had to go get our bread for the day, and I had to go get our vegetables. We didn't have refrigeration. You might get power 3 hours a day, depending on the season. Water came every 3 days. And so every morning as the head of the house, I mean, I went and bought the olives and whatever else. And then I'd come back, and then I'd teach, and I'd have 4 to 5 students in the morning. Then I had 4 to 5 students in the evening. It just took a lot to live. But you know what? And I talked to Jamie about that is that we were singularly focused. One, taking care of the family, but it was all about the Lord's work. I mean, that's what it was. I mean, it was just teaching. I was in the Bible, 7 hours a day and explaining and talking to these folks, my students, whether it was the military officers, the local bankers, or the junior high kids. It didn't make any difference. That was a point in my life when I was just like, pow. And then, it's kind of what I judge myself up against right now, because I get distracted on stuff. And I always think, you got too many distractions. You need to bring it back in. Are you doing what you need to be doing? Right? And as I told you last week, as Jamie and I change into this new phase of life of semi-retirement, is we're trying to intentionally purpose how we spend our time and where we spend our time. And it's on what's important. And so regardless of your situation. And then he says, stay in the situation that you were called. And it's like, if you're married, it almost, you get the sense that people were saying, well, for me to be focused on the Lord, should I get out of this marriage with this unbeliever? And he's saying, no, that's not what you do. You were called in a certain situation. That's where you found yourself. You need to stay in that situation. Be content and serve the Lord where you are, because as we all know, we all have our own sphere of influences. We all have our own unique interactions with people. You're not supposed to go quit and, go into solitude. And you're supposed to live your life, but you live your life as a Christian, right? You make a difference in how you think and talk and act, and so that people can see where your priorities are. That's what he's saying. Don't go change thinking you're going to change your world so you can be the next Keith and Grace Gaffners in the mission field. You got your own mission field right where you are. Look at it for what it is and affect change there. And then it says, if you've made a commitment, follow through with it. So he's talking about these individuals that have decided or proposed, they want to get married. In other words, your word needs to be very solid, right? Is that part of being a Christian, your word? I was selling my mom's van, and on Facebook, all that stuff. Anyway, I put it as pending, and this guy had been trying to shortchange me forever on it, and this lady with MS, anyway, she bought it, and I just held it for her until they could go to the bank and get whatever they needed. Well, this guy saw it went pending, and he writes me, and he says, "Did you sell the van?" And it's like, well, yeah, I'm working with a lady. Don't think it's going to be valuable. Well, I'll bring you give me your address, and I'll bring you the money right now, and I'll buy it. And I wrote him back, and I said, my word is worth more than some silly van, right? I already made an agreement with somebody. So it's a van. What is your word worth? What do people think your word's worth? Right? As a Christian. How do we do that? So, anyway, and then we jump over to that next chapter, and he uses this phrase, knowledge puffs up, but it says that love builds up. Y'all find that to be true in your own life? You get this knowledge and you think you're something special, right? You've captured something or whatever else. And we think it makes us better because we know something. And he's saying knowledge is not good. Knowledge is actually, in some ways, can be very negative, the way it affects us and how we use it. But he's saying love. Now, love builds up. So, when we are doing our interactions with all of our people, what oozes from us? Does our wealth of knowledge ooze from us? And so, makes us feel good, but other people kind of whatever? Or does love ooze from us? Yeah, that's something for us to think about. And then we get into that whole thing, and it's talking about eating the meat that was offered to idols. Now, we're not, in that day and event, everything I read basically said that, birthday parties, marriage celebrations, everything was done at the temples because that was the all-you-could-eat buffet, right? You could go, you could eat, and it was a big celebration. And if you said, I don't want to have, I'm a new believer, and the whole idol thing goes against my conscience, and of course, we like to impose our will on others, don't we? Right? We want to say, well, I've made this decision, so you should follow it. And then what Paul is saying is that we need to recognize our weaker brothers and the things that cause them to stumble or may cause them to go against their own conscience. So we need to be careful about how we like to put our priorities and our things that are within our conscience that we should all be doing, placing those expectations on other people, right? That might cause them to go against their conscience. So there's just a oodles and oodles amount of information, but there's three questions I want to ask you that I couldn't summarize it all. I want to ask you. When you ask questions, these folks are asking Paul questions about what they should do or how they should think or how they should act, how they should relate to people. When you ask questions, are you seeking truth/wisdom, or are you seeking confirmation that what you think is good? Right? I know when I was in the workplace and I had couples that were having problems, and one or both of them were talking divorce, they never seemed to ask for wisdom or guidance from anybody but divorced people. They didn't go and seek advice from people that had strong marriages. And the advice they were always getting, because you always hear it at the water fountain and everything else, is you're going to be a whole lot happier when you're out of that situation. So when you're seeking advice and counsel, where are you going to get it? Are you going to the Scriptures? Are you going to those that may be a little more spiritually mature than you? Or are you going into the echo chamber? My kids taught me that word. I had no idea what it meant. Echo chamber. We all know what that is, right? It's where you go. Oh, Stephanie, So it's where you go so you're going to hear exactly what you're espousing. It's just an echo. You say it, they say it. It's just, we're all saying it. Nothing, no one's challenged anything. It's just confirmation of what you wanted. I didn't know what it meant. But anyway, so there you go. Where do you seek counsel? Number 2, what is your example to others in your situation? How do people see you, and from your example, not from your words, but from your example, how would that cause them to live if they just followed your example? It's kind of like the airplane Christians, and you're saying, what are you talking about, the airplane Christians? If I had an airplane and I threw out 500 Bibles or 5,000 Bibles or 5 million Bibles across the United States and nobody knew anything about the Scriptures. If they sat down and they just read the Scriptures, read what was in the Word, you think we'd have so much differences within our religious community if the basis was the Scriptures? Do you? We'd all be reading the same thing, right? You can't. A lot of the stuff that's being taught, somebody had to come up with it because it's not there, and it's because some of it's pretty far-fetched, right? And so your example, when people see that, what does it say about your faith? And then finally, Paul talks about the single folks, they can just be focused on serving the Lord. And for the married folks, they've got some distractions, some obligations, because they chose to be a Christian, right? And then 2, they chose to be a spouse, right? And Christian has obligations, and a spouse has obligations, and then maybe they chose to have family. Right? So now they've got family obligations, right, that they need to meet. But regardless of which one of those situations that you're in, single, married with family, whatever else, what is capturing your attention? Is it me driving up and seeing an old 1949 Studebaker down there in the parking lot? Y'all seen Dell's truck down there? I thought about it for just a second. But that's not the example I'm talking about. What do you look at when you're driving down the road? No. What's capturing your attention in your life? Is it your relationship with your Heavenly Father, your Creator, your Savior? And you do whatever it takes to survive, put food in the mouth? Or are you engrossed by this world? That you don't have time to think about your Creator. You don't have time to spend time in the Word and read pretty thick stuff that we went through there with all these different situations. What's capturing your attention? That's my question to you. Thoughts or questions? All right, thank you very much.